It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. Go to emailrevealer.com, you get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You get that's a new version, by the way, just out. It's up on Amazon as well. And also, too, if you got any kind of problems, you need to do an asset search or a locate or a background report, you want to catch somebody cheating online, go to emailrevealer.com. Also, check out oppermanreport.com. That is the radio show website where you can subscribe and become a member. If you become a member, you get additional content that you don't hear live Friday night or Saturday night. It's all exclusive content, and also, too, documents. We put documents up there. We have a whole document section. We have all the Donald Trump lawsuits. We have the Montgomery Blair Sibley Verizon records of the D.C. Madam. A lot of great stuff. But today, I'm very excited. We have Don Geoffrey Giuliano. Now, Geoffrey Giuliano, the incredible guy, has written 30 books between 1980 and 2000s. He's going to be starring in a movie coming up, Mechanic's Resurrection, with Jason Statham, Tommy Lee Jones, Jessica Alba. And you can find his website at geoffreygiuliano.net. Originally found this guy. I found some stupid little article, and it said that this guy had tapes of Paul McCartney complaining to his relatives about them leeching off him and freeloading off him. And, we booked him because that was a great story. But then I'm looking into all this other work this guy's done. This is some incredible stuff. The guy was actually Ronald McDonald at one time for the McDonald commercials. Geoffrey, are you there?
I'm here, but I'm a little dubious now to find out that you're a private investigator. I got a lot of skeletons in my closet.
No, don't worry.
Don't look too carefully, please.
Nah, don't worry about that.
All right.
Let me ask you a question now, a little off topic, but because just yesterday I was interviewing Kathleen Willey, and we were talking about Linda Tripp and Monica Lewinsky and all that kind of stuff. You did a book about Monica Lewinsky and Linda Tripp tapes?
I did.
It
was an audio book. It was funny because there was a time when I couldn't answer the phone without people offering me money. Sadly, that time is long gone. But in the almost throughout the entire 90s, I would just get all these bizarre offers based on the success of my work in pioneering audiobooks with interviews, and also, my biographies that I'd written, illustrated books, coffee table books I'd written, so forth. Just a ridiculous amount of work, and people would just see that, and it was just like a snowball rolling down the hill. And I remember I was just leaving for the weekend to go to somewhere, and I got this call saying, we'll give you $25,000 if you can turn out a Linda Tripp, Monica Lewinsky audio book, going through all the tapes and taking the most salacious parts and putting them together with commentary. We need it by Monday. This was Friday at 5. And I had a big fight with my wife. I think I threw a chair across the office, if I remember, and not at her, but at the wall. And, being Sicilian, of course. And so anyway, this is our way of saying hello. And so anyway, I did it. And we canceled the trip. And yes, I did it. But that's like, boy, oh boy, I've forgotten about that. It wasn't a very exciting project. I've done so much more than that. But yes, I did.
Yeah, it just jumped right out of me because by coincidence, just yesterday we were talking about Linda Tripp all day long. Who is Geoffrey Giuliano? Tell me about yourself. How would you describe yourself?
I'm just sociopathic enough that I don't care what people think about me. When I was 12 years old in 1967, and one of the older boys, his name was Pat, I think, came up and said, "Do you want to buy this? It's $4. And I said, "What is it?" He said, "It's LSD." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Well, you want it or not?" So I saved up, believe it or not, I saved up my lunch money for several days, and I bought this acid, And I had no idea what it was. I
How
mean,
old were
maybe
you?
I'd read something in the paper, but certainly no, that's it. And I took this thing and I went to see a Steppenwolf concert. And they were playing Born to Be Wild just when I started to get off. And this is the old days before they lost the recipe. And I hit the roof. And I tell you, I was a kind of a bit of a nerd. I would, read all day and study biographies. I remember of Benjamin Franklin and astronauts, and I would go to the Ringling Art Museum in Sarasota, Florida, and look at the great masters and stuff. So I was quite intellectual as a child, but boy, this took the roof off. And I immediately became a hippie. From that moment on, and I still am. That does not mean, however, that I continue to take LSD because, as George Harrison once said, really after 3 or 4 times you get everything that you're going to get out of it. But in terms of my thinking, politically, socially, ecologically, spiritually, I'm exactly the same as I ever was, and that doesn't date me at all. That because these values are the values that could save the world, that people are ignoring, and then we have what we have today, which I don't need to tell you. Everybody knows that we have this sort of oily, snake oil, used car salesman, lunatic, narcissist, misogynist, Donald Trump running for president. And this officious kind of, I can't, you told me I can't swear, but it starts with a B and it has something to do with a lady dog, running for president. We don't have, it's a terrible choice, but the real revolution, the real change that people can make in the world is in themselves. You always have to start with yourself. And that's where I think those hippie values are perennial. I know David Crosby would agree with me. He talks about this a lot. So I became a hippie. Then I went to my mother. I used to smoke this Colombian. We had 3 kinds of pot when I was a kid. We had Mexican, Colombian Gold, and Colombian Red. So I would, I'd have maybe I'd get the money for the Colombian, and I'd be smoking it all day in my room. My mother would knock. I remember she tapped on the door. She said, "Geoffrey, don't you think you might want to consider going to college? Don't you think it might be a good idea for you?" Very, very kind. It's very so sweet now that I look at it in hindsight. And I said, "Well, okay, I'll go and see." When I got there to the junior college, they said, "What do you want to study?" I thought, Jesus, I don't know. I mean, my God, acting, because you get to shoot your mouth off. There's girls there, and you get to show off, which is what I was and am. So I went into acting, and I did the whole thing that nobody does now. People just show up and say, "I'm an actor." But in those days, I started in community theater. Then I went and got an associate's degree in acting, then a bachelor's degree, then a master's degree, then Shakespeare in the Park and dinner theater and regional theater. And TV for free for 5 years in Toronto, playing everything from Santa Claus to updating the weather. And after 5 years, they paid my taxi. And then in 1984, out of a job, broke with 2 kids in Toronto, after just finishing my contract as playing Ronald McDonald for Vickers and Benson Advertising in McDonald's of Canada, and out of work and faced with having to go back to the States because my visa was about to run out, I called up. I looked under P for publisher in the yellow pages and found Methuen and Carswell. It's the first one I saw, and called up. Now, you could never do this. This is impossible. Try it. You won't even get through. They don't even have phone numbers now. It's through the website. I called up, and they said, "Methuen and Carswell." I said, "Yeah. Would you like a book on the Beatles?" And they said, "Hold on, please." And the next thing, this guy comes on. He says, "Hi, this is Bill Hussian. I'm the whatever VP of so really funny you would call because we were just talking today on our editorial meeting. We really want a book in the Beatles. Come right down." So I packed 2 suitcases full of Beatles memorabilia, and I went down to this office, and they gave me $30,000 on the spot. Now, $30,000 is terrible for world rights on a book, but I was broke. We had neighbors bringing food to the door. I would hide and say, "You go," to my wife. I couldn't, So this was unbelievable. Suddenly I had $30,000, and my friends would come to me and say, "You going to write the book, or are you going to split town?" I said, "Well, I thought about that, but gosh, maybe I'll actually try to write the book. Can you do it? I have no idea. I've never tried before. Well, apparently I can, because 35 books later, I'm still going strong. So what happened is this first book, The Beatles: A Celebration, was published by Methuen in Canada, Sidgwick and Jackson in England, and St. Martin's Press in America, all very prestigious publishers, and it became a worldwide, international best-selling book, completely by default. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing, but it just was that time when there hadn't been a book about the Beatles for a few years, and I guess the world wanted one. And then it was just book after book after book after book after book until 2006, when my last book came out, which was a biography on the Beatles called Carry That Weight, The Beatles Unauthorized. And after sitting in this by now mansion, estate, Victorian mansion on the banks of the Erie Canal in Lockport, New York, I was fat, I was rich, I didn't really have too much to do because I was rich. You know, I didn't have to worry about stuff. And I made a change in my life. I used to go to India once a year for meditation, and I would go way up into the Himalayas and very exotic. I wouldn't wear shoes, and they called me the barefoot in the snow, and they would call me the barefoot Baba, and ate only vegetarian, even though I was fat because I drank a lot of milk. But anyway, I was lacto-vegetarian at that point. So long story short, I got a frequent flyer trip, but it only took me as far as Bangkok on my way to India to meditate. And when I got to the airport in Bangkok, the guy said, "Where you go?" I said, I don't know. I don't know. He said, "Oh, I take you Nana Plaza." Now, Nana Plaza is the world's most notorious hub of prostitution in the world. I was I was married at that point, and things were kind of coming to a close. Don't worry, this is not an X-rated story, but marginally so. I went to Nana Plaza, I checked in, and let's put it this way. I saw a whole different view of the world that vegetarian meditators don't see. And we'll just leave it at that. And I stayed 15 years. So it must have been pretty interesting. I now have an 8-year-old Thai son. A military dictatorship took over in Thailand in 2014. And one of the first laws they made was that if you're white, you can't be in a movie. And I was a movie star in Thailand, which didn't add up to a hill of beans. I think at the height of my career, I made $6,500 a year. But that doesn't mean I wasn't a movie star. It just means that they don't pay you much in Thailand. So I was this sort of Thai Western movie star. And whenever Scorpion King with Universal or Hard Target 2 for Universal or Mechanic Resurrection would come to save money, they'd leave a few parts open. And they would inevitably, I was the best actor around, and I would get those parts. So when they came in, the junta, these 90-year-old generals, they made a law that only Thai people could act in these movies, which is just jealousy. And they will give you 5 years per movie. And it goes back, it's retroactive. So that means I would get whatever 5 times 25 because I made 25 movies. That's how many years I'd get in the clinker. So I immediately split at 62 with my 8-year-old Thai son. And turns out he's 3 years behind everybody else because I was getting ripped off at the fancy international school that was not teaching him English, reading and writing, although he can speak perfectly. He can't read and write English at 8 years old. He's illiterate. So it was high time to get out of there. I came back. I went to Hollywood. I got an agent. And now I'm talking to you.
Let me ask you a question. In all your experiences, in all your travels, have you ever tried decaf? You heard of Sanka?
No, but amphetamine works pretty good.
There you go, man. Hey, listen, I was going to ask you, because this is great stuff, by the way.
Dude, I'll tell you something. Yeah. I didn't only stay in Thailand. I mean, this is like, I remember when I was 15, smoking a really heavy joint and leaning against the wall and thinking, with my life, I'm going to do things. I'm going to do things. I'm going to travel to different countries, strange countries. I'm going to make movies. I'm going to write books. And, I would tell this to my friends, and they gave me the nickname, okay, Rock. They were calling me Rock, like Rock Hudson, like, yeah, right, you're going to do all that stuff. But you know what? I did. And I've been to Burma, Bhutan, Nepal, India, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, where the women are absolutely beautiful. Funny thing about Vietnam, people would say, where are you from? I didn't want to say America, geez, God knows what they do. But it turns out they love Americans in Vietnam. And also, the guys that are the taxi drivers or the tuk-tuk drivers, the rickshaw guys, you notice a lot of them got an arm lobbed off. And I asked somebody, said, why do all these guys have one arm? And they said, oh, they were the guys that worked with the Americans during the war. And after the communists took over, when we won, we, put them up and lobbed off a limb. Okay, that's nice. So why do they like Americans? I have no idea. But young women would follow me back to the hotel because I was by virtue of the fact that I was an American. I can't explain it, but Vietnam, aside from that, wonderful, wonderful country. So I've been to Laos, all through Cambodia, and I've made movies in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, all over India, from one end to the other. And this took about 20 years. And I'm kind of done with that now. I want to raise my son, whose name is Eden Garrett Giuliano. Why is that name significant? Because, like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, spelling LSD, I wanted my son's initials to spell something. I sat there for 2 weeks trying to get something that would make a word. Well, what does Eden Garrett Giuliano spell? It spells egg.
Okay.
So I figure when he's at Oxford, say, oh, yes, here he is. He's a good egg, isn't he? And also when he has his monogrammed shirt, it's going to say egg on there, So... or
when he runs for president, like Jeb, he'll be egg instead.
Yeah, not LBJ or JFK. He'll be egg.
Hey, let me ask you a question, because it kind of got past me. How old were you when you first took LSD?
12.
12 years old, okay. And
now I'm going to make an admission.
Yeah.
I'm going to make an admission. Once or twice a year, I will take double the amount of magic mushrooms. That's it.
Okay.
And I call that hitting the reset button. You're supposed to take like 6 grams. I take 12, which takes you to what's called level 5. There's 5 levels of a psychedelic journey, which have been, charted. And the 5th is the top. In fact, my friend gave me a T-shirt that said, I survived level 5. And level 5, you don't have a body. You're a point of consciousness. But I got to tell you, for all those people that think these are drugs are neither good nor bad. I will tell you that there are hippie drugs, and those hippie drugs are marijuana, which now, okay, that's, almost born-again Christian at this point. Fine, no problem with that. MDMA, which is which on the street name is ecstasy. There's a lot of studies going on that with the people who come back from the war and they have anxiety, and I forgot the proper name for it, but they have some sort of disorder from the war. They're treating them with MDMA. Now they're beginning to research LSD again. But the hippie drugs are marijuana, magic mushrooms, LSD, peyote, mescaline, and MDMA. And those are the only ones I've ever dabbled in. Least people think I'm, doing OxyContin or something. That's another generation. So we go for those natural things. And do I take drugs? Yeah, twice a year. I'm an adult. I'm 62. And I got to tell you that it's done me nothing but good. And the drug I take is a magic mushroom. Now, so I guess if that makes me a bad person, then I'm a bad person.
Now, where did you grow up? You grew up on the East Coast, but you mentioned something about Florida?
0 to 11, Alcott Beach, New York, Niagara County, right near Niagara Falls, 20 miles away. Then okay. I lived in Tampa for about, till I was about 21. Then I got to be Ronald McDonald. I moved to Canada, Toronto, lived there for 5 years, and then spent about 3 years in England when my books were really big. I made $9 million off those books. From 1984 to 2006, I made $9 million. which is really funny because I had terrible deals because I never got a business manager, an accountant. I didn't save anything for retirement. Really stupid. Because it went on for 20 years, I thought it would never end. So the way I figure it, when we sat down and figured that I made $9 million over 20 years, how much did the publishers make? Because those books were like $35 a piece, and I got like a quarter a book or something. So hundreds of millions of dollars those books grossed. For the publishers, I got very little. But I was cavalier with my money, and now I'm broke. But it's okay. I tell you, when you go to India and you go way out in the rural area, you see people that have I'm telling you this is an amazing thing. You see people that have nothing. I mean nothing. They have these sort of they keep them clean, but sometimes they're even made out of cow crap. It's called gover, and they make with straw and they mix it together rather like adobe. They make these houses. They have a thatched roof. I see the woman outside sweeping the dirt, to make it nice. There's no indoor plumbing. They cook on an open fire. And I got to tell you something. They have nothing, and they are happy. And you can see it in their eyes. I think we have a lot to learn about living simply, but thinking in a high philosophical way. It isn't just something to say. I've seen it. I've seen, there's one funny story. I have many stories about India, but one in particular. I told a friend of mine that it's a tradition in India that if you go to any house and knock on the door and say, "Hi, could you make me something to eat?" Well, sure, sit down, and they'll start from scratch, and they'll make you bread from chapatis and the curry and whatever you want, and they'll squeeze the orange juice. So my friend said, "That's ridiculous. You'll get arrested. Let's try it." So we went to one house, and they did it. And he said, "Well, it's got to be a fluke." I said, all right, you think it's a fluke? Okay, let's try next door. We went down the street a little bit, we tried it again. These people were beautiful people, and they had nothing. So I think having stuff could be a big part of our problem in this world. Ask Donald Trump. He's got a lot of stuff. Is he a cool guy? Is he a guy that we all want to hang with and listen to and lead us? I don't believe so. So I believe that many times money is, because remember, I was a multimillionaire for 20 years, and now I'm not. I've been on both sides of the coin. I'm just as happy now with no money, anyway.
And where do you live now?
I'm staying at my friend Dr. Martin Schiffert's house in Billings, Montana, but I'm just about to move out to Hollywood to do some work. I have to go back to Thailand to tidy up a few things. I've got some furniture and storage. That's not very interesting, but yeah, I'm in Montana right now.
Yeah, a friend of mine just sent me back a bunch of pictures from Montana. That's where they have the huckleberry, right? The huckleberry is big there?
What do I know from huckleberry?
I don't know, man.
Go ask him. Don't ask me about huckleberry. I'll hang up the phone.
Okay. All right, listen. Okay, now, where do you want to start on all this stuff with the Beatles? How did you get such access?
I'll tell you. I'll tell you what happened. I'm a little tiny. Well, before there was two things. There were several things. Several epiphanies I had in my life, as many from my generation, right? And one of them was the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan show. Everybody says that, Ed Sullivan, not Ed Sullivan. I don't know why I say that all the time, but you might as well. He was the king of TV. So they were on Ed's show, and my father didn't like it at all. Look, that's disgraceful. But my mothers and my sisters kind of like it, and I really dug it. So my mother, I think, bought me a Beatle T-shirt. Then I remember, if you fast forward to 1967, I took the LSD, and then Sgt. Pepper came out, and it was a whole different ball game. And then I grew my hair down and went to live in the commune, and the girls would take off their clothes, and I'd take off my clothes, and we all go swimming outside in the pond. It wasn't sexual. It was just a lovely, lovely time to be young, very quite innocent, really. And go to the rock festivals, went to Woodstock, took a pee next to Jimi Hendrix. I was in there peeing in the thing, and he walks in and says, "Hey, man, how you doing?" "Hi, how you doing?" I didn't take a look. I was tempted to, the rumors about Jimmy. But so I took a pee next to Jimi Hendrix, and he was a really nice guy. Actually, he was playing for free at a jam. He used to jam all the time. Anyway, I began to collect Beatles memorabilia. I collected it like a lunatic. I would tell you, I got to a point where I was what I call a beatard, which the Beatle people hate, B-E-T-A-R-D, Beatard, incredibly politically incorrect, or a Beatleholic. And I would like spend the rent money for Beatles stuff. And this is when I was married, we're fast forwarding now to when I was married and had a couple of kids and like, where's the rent? Well, I bought this really great John Lennon item that's worth, you mean we don't have the money for the rent? Well, no, but when I sell this, which I never would, you see. So I was at this Beatle convention and I saw something, a piece of paper on the floor. And it said, I picked it up and it said, do you really need a Beatles lunchbox, a Beatles record player? What are you doing with your life? Now, William Shatner wrote a book to the Trekkies called Get a Life. And I exactly understand that. That was another epiphany. And at that moment, I stopped selling Beatles, or I stopped collecting Beatles stuff and started selling it. Then in 1984, I wrote my first book. And then 20 years went by in this great big Victorian mansion where I never had to worry about money. My wife would put out $3,000 a day in $100 bills on the nightstand, and I'd put it in my pocket in case I wanted to buy something, anything during the day. It usually went to the kids. And I had never any worry about money for 20 years. And I remember being in Abu Dhabi, and some Muslim guy was like chasing me down the street, and I thought, oh my God, he said, are you Geoffrey Giuliano? I said, yeah. And, I've read all of your books. They're fantastic. Can I have your autograph, please? So, yeah, it was an interesting ride. Next question, counselor.
Yeah, the next question is, and I want to time this because we only got about 3 minutes to a break. Before we get into the Beatles stuff, you have some information about the death of Brian Jones, too, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But that's not a 3-minute answer.
Yeah, I know. That's the problem.
You better hit that one after the break, dude, because I've been studying Brian Jones for 25 years. Brian Jones was interesting because he was the first androgynous rock star. And believe me, the Mick and Keith that we know today, they're just pale imitations with great respect for both of them, of Brian Jones. They took their cues from Brian. Brian was the kind of guy that on Ruby Tuesday, where he plays that recorder bit, it was the first time he'd ever picked up a recorder. This guy was a musical genius, like a Beethoven. He'd just sit down and could play anything. But he had problems. He had problems at home. We can discuss after the break. There's not too much I don't know about Brian because I've been studying his life and his case for 25 years. If you want to go online, you can go to brianjonesbook.com and read more, or you can go to icon, I-C-O-N, editions.press and read even more. But yeah, Brian was very interesting to me, and it was so sad. He was such a handsome, virile guy and a great swimmer. He did not drown. He had help dying in that swimming pool.
Okay. We are with Geoffrey Giuliano. His website is the main one. The guy's got like 40 websites. It's unbelievable. But one of the main ones is geoffreygiuliano.net. Jeffrey, how do you spell that? Geoffreygiuliano.net. Okay, great. We'll be right back with more of Geoffrey Giuliano right after these messages. This is your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. And if you're enjoying this show right now, there's more. You can get more. You can go to the Ed Opperman YouTube channel, and you could subscribe there. And we have archives of all of our past shows for over the past 3 years, about 200, 300 shows. You can also go to the Opperman Report Spreaker channel, and you could follow us there. Again, a ton of shows, about 300 shows on there. And whenever we do an impromptu show, an emergency type broadcast that we do during the week occasionally, you'll get an email notifying you of breaking news and spontaneous broadcasts that we may do during the week. You can also go to oppermanreport.com and become a member. If you become a member, you help support the free archives on Spreaker and YouTube, and you help support the free shows on Friday evening and on Saturday evening. Each of these shows, Friday evening and Saturday evening, are carried for free on 7 internet stations, okay? So you help support that, but also, too, at OppermanReport.com in the members section, we have exclusive content. Shows that are recorded during the week that are only available to members. So please check out OppermanReport.com and help support the show.
The son of a Polish immigrant who grew up in a Brooklyn tenement, Bernie Sanders. He went to public schools, then college, where the work of his life began, fighting injustice and inequality, speaking truth to power. Bernie moved to Vermont, won election and praise as one of America's best mayors. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families and for principle, opposing the Iraq War, supporting veterans. Now he's taking on Wall Street and a corrupt political system that holds up a rigged economy. Bernie's campaign is funded by over 1 million small contributions from people like you. He's fighting for living wages, equal pay, and tuition-free public colleges. Bernie Sanders.
People are sick and tired of establishment politics, and they want real change.
Bernie Sanders. Husband, father, grandfather, an honest leader, building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Check out strawmanmusic.com. Sean Duff is our webmaster here at the Opperman Report, and he's a very talented musician. He's part of a band called Strawman. They're based up there in Canada. Don't hold that against them. These are like-minded folks. If you like the shows you hear on the Opperman Report, you'll like the music that they have over at strawmanmusic.com.
Enough is enough. Wall Street's greed and illegal behavior drove this country into the worst economic downturn since the 1930s. And then, after getting a huge taxpayer bailout because they were too big to fail, it turns out that 3 out of the 4 largest banks are bigger today than they were before we bailed them out. That's crazy. I'm Bernie Sanders. My plan: break up the big banks who are strangling our economy and make them pay their fair share of taxes. Then we can invest in the middle class, expand Social Security, and provide universal college education. I'll rein in Wall Street behavior so they can't crash our economy again. Will they like me? No. Will they begin to play by the rules if I'm president? You better believe it. I'm Bernie Sanders, Democratic candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
You know, you can get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, if you go to my website, emailrevealer.com. Now, this is a limited edition book, okay? And you can get a signed copy of this book, and it'll be personally autographed to you or whoever you want to give the book to as a gift. Once you have my signature on that book, you can copy the signature and put it on checks and pass them all over the world. Emailrevealer.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator.
He's fought injustice and inequality his whole life. Bernie Sanders. As a college student, he was arrested for challenging segregated housing. Bernie marched with Dr. King and thousands of others for civil rights. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families on health care and jobs. Now he's taking on Wall Street banks and a corrupt political system that keeps in place a rigged economy. Bernie Sanders, a reformer who believes in ending racial profiling and mass incarceration so the justice system works for everyone. Bernie Sanders.
There is no president who will fight harder to end institutional racism and reform our broken criminal justice system.
Bernie Sanders, an honest leader building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here with Geoffrey Giuliano, and besides GeoffreyGiuliano.net, there's another website. This guy's got like 30 websites, but there's another one, GiulianoCollection.com. And while we're talking, you guys should take a look at this. There's some incredible stuff on here
And it's all for sale.
Yeah.
Including tapes of John Lennon tripping on LSD that no one's ever heard. John and Yoko sex tapes, which doesn't mean they're having sex. It means they're talking about their sexual picadillos and preferences, and they are rather surprising. They don't fall strictly in the heterosexual category. I won't say which one, but it's a surprise, and maybe not who you think. And but mainly what I really have it's just an amazing thing is that I have, through a very close associate of the Beatles, Derek Taylor, I have 4 Andy Warhol portraits of John Lennon, 13 by 13 inches, which were taken at his home, John's home in Tittenhurst Park, while he was recording the Imagine LP, and they were to be for the front and back cover for the Imagine LP cover, but they were not used, and they've never been seen, never been published. They're original Andy Warhol photographs, and when people say, how can you authenticate them, in addition to a letter from Christie's, which does authenticate them, but is not amazingly not good enough for some people, I have an actual movie that was taken of the photo session, and those are for sale. And if anyone's interested in contacting me, they can contact me at milesfar@hotmail.com. milesfar@hotmail.com. But you better have some money. They're expensive.
Yeah, there's a wealth of information that I've never heard of. You know, you got a lot of content here, and there's even a picture on here that's free to the public of Warhol in the middle of Yoko and John, where all 3 of them have their hands on each other's crotches.
Yeah, well, look, one of the things about, I will tell you this.
Yeah.
I've written 30, I think it's 35 books, but not all on the Beatles. I've done Hendrix, I've done a few Rolling Stones book. I did a Rolling Stones book called The Beatles Album, which Keith Richards once called the best Rolling Stones book ever. But the Beatles, I have a mandate when I do a book. I will repeat no information. I will repeat no photograph, as many people do. And now, as the years go by, I see people stealing from my books as well. But I have an ethic about that. I won't repeat anything that's been in any other book. So if you read through my books, you will see that it's basically all new information and no repeated photographs. Now, in obtaining my books, I would like to tell you that I signed my first contract in 1984 and my last in 2003, I think. By now, all the rights to the books have reverted back to me. Well, let me tell you something about publishers. They might give you a few bucks, but they're not very good with books, which seems ridiculous, but they just don't care. They don't have the time. They don't care the way the author does. So I've taken all of my books, and over these past years, 10 years now, I've been digitizing, expanding, fixing up, fixing up old photographs in Photoshop, finding new unpublished photographs, and soon my books will all come out again pretty much at one time. They'll be available on iBooks, iTunes, Amazon.com, and at my own websites. So this is, other than making love with beautiful young women in Thailand, being single, of course, that's okay. I was working on these books for 10 years. And that's kind of what I did when I was in Thailand. And, of course, I made 25 movies as well. I think I'm a little bit of an overachiever. What do you think, Ed?
Yeah, but it's very impressive. Very impressive life.
I'm not trying to impress anybody. It's almost compulsive. Well,
Right.
I remember one time my daughter came up to me. It was a sad realization for me. And she said, because she was having drug problems. She was a teenager. She's in her 40s now. And she said, you're an addict. What the hell are you talking about? I don't take drugs. Maybe I take mushrooms once. No. You're an addict. How am I an addict? You're a work addict. You don't spend time with your family. You don't go to the father-daughter dance. You don't go to the science fair. You sit. Yeah, but they're paying me all this money. It doesn't matter, Dad. You're an addict. And that was another. See, I've had these kind of moments of clarity in my life that I'm thankful for. But then I countered that by taking 15 years off in Thailand. But my idea of slacking is making 25 movies and digitizing 35 books. See, there were so many great books, that came out in the 60s and 70s that we'll never see again. And I didn't want that to happen to my books. And, they're important historical documents. That's not ego. It's a fact. I went and I didn't just like steal things from other people's books like they do to mine. I went and I found John Lennon's old relatives, all dead now, cousins and uncles and next door neighbors, and the same with his sisters. I actually wrote a book with John Lennon's sister, Julia Baird, with an introduction by Paul McCartney called John Lennon, My Brother. So I traveled the world because they gave me money. I had the money to do it. And I found all these people that had never really spoken before. And they would all invariably have, oh, have you seen this photo? No. May I use it in my book? Yes. And so that's how my books have such exclusive content. The list of people that I've interviewed intimately include George Harrison, Paul McCartney, Yoko Ono, Cynthia Lennon, Julian Lennon, Sean Lennon. It goes on, and Derek Taylor. It goes on and on. I became friends with Pete Townshend from The Who. We're still friendly.
Let me ask you this.
We've been buddies. We've been email buddies now for 20 years. Go ahead.
Now, what is the story of these tapes you have of Paul McCartney's relatives talking about how he?
Well, yeah. Okay. Here's how that happened. Yeah. I was at the height of my game. As I told you, the phone would ring all the time with offers, and I got a few calls from celebrities. One of them was funny. This guy says, "Hello, Geoffrey." I said, "Yeah." "It's Ginger." I said, "Ginger who?" "How'd you get this number?" "Ginger Baker from Cream, mate. Would you like to write my book?" And unfortunately, because he's a horrible person, just talented but horrible, we did do his book for St. Martin's Press. But another one of those phone calls was from Paul McCartney's adopted sister. Oh, yes, he has an adopted sister. Jim McCartney adopted her. I've got the papers to prove it, although he says it's not true, and he has no sister. Named Ruth McCartney. Look her up. And then Angie McCartney, who Paul's father married just after Paul became famous in 1964. And they were living on the street. Paul, as soon as Jim McCartney died, Paul booted them out. Took the house away in Liverpool on Baskerville Road and put them out in the street. And I'm not kidding you. He put them out in the street. And those poor girls came to me. They lived at my house for quite some time. And we went into the studio every day and we recorded their whole life story. And we had a deal, which I made with all my celebrities, that the tapes and the content belong to me if we don't write the book. Well, we didn't end up getting a deal on that because, publishers have a funny idea. It's cyclic about Beatle books. First, oh no, the Beatles are done, and oh, the Beatles are hot. Oh no, the Beatles are done. So I've lived through several of those cycles, being in this since 1984. And at that time, we're in one of those down things where nobody will be interested in Paul McCartney's stepmother and sister who lived with him, literally lived with him from 1964 to around 1976 or 7. And that's the whole shooting match. So they know everything. So the tapes are not like I got a hold of. I recorded the tape, memoirs, which I still have and own, of Ruth and Angela McCartney.
And what do they have to say about Paul?
Nothing too good. Nothing very nice at all.
Right.
That they would smuggle marijuana in the kids' diapers when they went across the border. Denny Lane from Wings also lived at my house for 6 months. He didn't have any place to stay, and so he told me a lot of stuff. They wouldn't clean up the kitchen, and they'd say, "Oh, Ange, you can clean up. We're just tired. We want to go to bed." They'd make a big mess. They would, it's nothing horrible, but they were sort of selfish, self-centered, what a surprise, show business people that treated people like shit. There's one kind of amazing thing where Jim McCartney said to Paul while Paul was visiting, this is almost verbatim, his house in Liverpool. in the world, Jim said, who was an older guy, he said, I don't like you smoking that marijuana in this house. And Paul said, listen, mate, this is my house, and I'm putting every morsel of food in your mouth, and I'll smoke whatever the hell I like. That's, not exact, but pretty close to the point. He didn't treat his father very well. He didn't go to his father's funeral.
Really?
Now, I understand that Paul McCartney's a god now, even though he's forgotten how to sing. By the way, listen to the recordings of his concert. I wonder why he has those good-looking young guys to do all the high notes on Hey Jude and Long and Winding Road. They know exactly when to cut in. But listen, you got to understand. Oh, we got Geoffrey Giuliano bad-mouthing the Beatles. What a schmo. No, it's not like that. I was on the O'Reilly Factor, which if anyone has a tape of it, please send me. And he started giving me some crap about, we don't need to know all these personal things about John Lennon and his sex life and his drugs. And I said, oh, yes, you do. Bill, listen to me. When we see Picasso's work now in a historical way, we can see the terribly disjointed, cubist, malformed way that he would paint women. And now we know that he used to beat his wives up and then after say sorry and make love to them on the floor. So now when we know that, when we have that information, we understand more about the artist. If you want to understand the art, you have to know about the artist. And that's my role as biographer. Now, people like to kill the messenger. So I was very, very, literally sometimes, I've had death threats. I have made sure I have everything on tape. And as a responsible journalist, you know about this, Ed, you have to source it 3 different sources before you publish it. And believe me, publishers aren't going to publish stuff that you can't prove or they'll get sued. And they'll lose, they're the ones with the deep pocket, not me. I can walk away and say, oh, sorry, I thought it was right. But no, I've never been sued, and I've written all these books on the Beatles, nor are they salacious by intent. I'm no Kitty Kelly. I'm just interested in the truth. And if John Lennon were sitting here next to me while he wrote a song, just give me some truth, all I want is the truth. George Harrison was a cool guy. He begrudgingly acknowledged that my book was accurate in the media, which his wife didn't like. I have an interest. Look, what's the point of me spending 20 years of my life writing, I was going to say BS. I can say BS. I was going to say the other way. BS about the Beatles for a couple of bucks. I'm a hippie. Why would I do that? They're my heroes. But what I am interested in is I'm not a PR man. I'm not a spin doctor. Have you ever noticed how rock and roll stars that were revolutionaries in the 60s and 70s are Republican now? They're conservative as hell. Well, I'm not. And I'm interested in the truth. So I have a mandate, which really makes a lot of Beatle people not like me. And it's a love or hate relationship. I get these letters saying, I'm worse. I had one saying I was worse than Mark David Chapman for what I wrote about John in Lennon in America, one of my best books, which I hope to see made into a movie. By the way, one of my books, Painted Black, The Murder of Brian Jones, was made into a movie called Stoned, which came out in 2006. It's the only movie ever on the Rolling Stones, and it's a good movie, and I urge everybody to take a look at that movie. But I found the tape of John Lennon, September 2nd, 1979, in which he talks about a quasi-sexual encounter with his mother. I mean, it's John talking about it, so I put it in the book.
How'd you get a hold of that?
Terrible guy to do that.
How'd you get a hold of that tape?
I got a hold of none of your business. I'm a journalist. I claim the fifth on that. Journalists, they don't have a responsibility to give out their sources, Ed. You should know that.
Well, I could ask the question, though. I'm just asking a question. Now,
sometimes I'll tell you, sometimes I won't.
I got a question for you, though. Now, what do you make of all these theories where people claim that Paul McCartney might have been replaced with a double?
Absolute hogwash.
Okay, what brings you to that conclusion?
Because Paul McCartney still exists, and it's just stupid. Now, if you want to talk about 9/11, that's a different story. It defies the laws of physics that an asymmetrical collision can cause
we can get
symmetrical collapse, especially by Building 7, which wasn't hit by anything. But we won't go there on this show, although you're welcome to call me up on that, and we'll do another one just on 9/11, because I have a lot to say about that. But so as conspiracy theories go, I am a truther as opposed to a liar, which is the opposite of a truther. I'm a proud truther. But Paul McCartney, I don't want to waste my time with you to talk about why Paul McCartney's not dead. He's not dead.
Okay. I'm asking your opinion. You're giving it to me.
I'm sorry. I didn't overheated there, Ed.
And by the way, my producer who contacted you to do the show, William Ramsey, he wrote a book about 9/11,
Yeah, well, it's Richard Gage does great work with architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and there's just no way that kerosene, which 70% of it, that big fireball you saw, 70% of it was gone before it even hit the building, and there's no way an aluminum and epoxy plastic nose cone plane is going to penetrate, no matter how fast it's going, 600 miles an hour, which it couldn't because it would break up that close to the ground. They can only go that fast when they're 30,000 feet up. There's no way that could have happened, and it's a great shame that they got away with it. Whoever that was got away with it. And it certainly wasn't bin Laden with a walkie-talkie in a cave in Afghanistan that's going to get around NORAD, who just happened to take the day off. But no, Paul McCartney's not dead, but his voice is.
Okay, and now you have tapes of John Lennon saying that he slept with his own mother.
I didn't say that.
Oh, no, what did you say? Okay.
Don't you put words in my mouth, counselor.
What did you say?
I said quasi-sexual.
Oh.
Quasi-sexual. If you read the first chapter of Lennon in America, you'll hear the whole thing. And if you want to buy a copy of the tape, it's $15,000. So there you go. Yeah, he was. And actually, in the same tape, he talks about. He says. What does he say? I'll give you the exact, because I remember, because I worked with this for so long. It's a very short, about 10 minutes. He said, 6th of September, 1979. Well, I don't know if I should just stay in bed or jump out the window. He was actually suicidal. And then he talked about how this quasi-sexual experience means he put his hand on his mother's breast in the bedroom. And he wondered if he should go all the way and could go all the way, but it stopped there. See, I have a problem with people that try to deify anybody. The Beatles are good musicians. They were cool guys. They were harbingers of a higher consciousness. They were the king of the hippies. But they weren't gods. They didn't walk on water. They go to the bathroom. They fart. Sometimes they're grouchy. Sometimes they, do the wrong thing. And these people that live in a dream, but just before John Lennon died, he gave a Playboy interview and he said, look, the Beatles weren't it. We just showed the way, like land ho. We taught people, if anything, if you need to swim, then learn to swim. Go ahead and swim. We're not going to show you how to swim. We're not going to take you there. You can't ride our coattails through life, but I got to tell you, I used to wonder when I was 30 and 40, are these people still going to be worshiping the Beatles when they're 70? Damned if they are. Yeah. Because they contact me and they are the beatards. You know what I did? The Beatle drum with the big T? I made up just to kind of wake them up. Whenever I see these like crazy people wearing Sgt. Pepper outfits and they're 65 and a great big fat stomach, sometimes I'll put on their Facebook, I'll put the Beatles drum, but it says the beatards on it, trying to wake them up. Not trying to be mean, but just trying to wake them up. Never give your life away to a dream, especially a dream of the past. We've got work to do in the present. I've got an 8-year-old Thai son that needs me. I don't need to be thinking about at 62, who's your favorite Beatle? Been there, done that.
Now, you have a lot of information too about John's relationship with Yoko.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
And I'm sorry that I do.
Okay.
Because almost none of it is good. When he died, they were going to get a divorce. He really couldn't stand the sight of that woman. I don't care if she sues me. She slept with so many guys while she was married to Lennon, and he slept with many women, and maybe a few guys like Tony. What was his name? The guy that they based Saturday Night Fever on.
Oh, really? I know that guy.
Yeah. Ask him about John Lennon and his advances to him.
Denny Terrio.
No, that's not Denny Terrio. That was Merv Griffin.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
No, I think Merv got into that a little bit. Denny. God bless Denny. I got nothing against Denny, but I got a lot against Yoko Ono. Yoko Ono kept him, he was kind of a bird. No, he was a bird in a gilded cage. He was depressive. She took advantage of that. He was frightened of the world. Don't worry, I'll protect you from the world, John. And now she's ended up this talentless, horrific, non-entity has ended up with all those copyrights and all that money. And poor Sean Lennon, I know it's cruel, but it's guised as a compliment, that Sean Lennon got John's looks and Yoko Ono's talent. Very cruel, isn't it? But how this woman, I'll tell you a funny thing I just heard the other day. Someone who worked for John and Yoko told me that Yoko Ono would never stand to see any of her LPs in the cutout bins, in the remainder bins, which of course they all would be, because I have a lot of the royalty statements and they didn't sell squat. John's did, hers didn't. That's why she insisted on double fantasy. One side John, one side Yoko, so that it would have to be a success by virtue of John was on the other side. It wasn't because they were all so lovey-dovey. It's that she wanted to get a hit record. So anyway, her records that she made, her solo records, approximately Infinite Universe, Yoko Ono, Plastic Ono Band, Feeling the Space, all of them, many of them, she would buy them up and she stored them in a warehouse so that they would never seem to be not selling, and the numbers would be up there in terms of sales, and she could claim that they were a great success. Not a nice lady. I don't like her.
Hey,
and she broke up the Beatles.
What do you know about Yoko involvement in hypnosis, hypnotizing John, hypnotizing Paul? What do you know? Anything about that?
There's nothing about that, but she got him onto heroin.
Okay, I've heard that too.
She got him onto heroin. They shot it. They sniffed it. I knew some Hare Krishnas that were living out at Tittenhurst Park. I don't just make this stuff up. I make sure that it's real. You want something real, you can come to me. It's not always pretty, but it's real. Life ain't pretty. This has down people in Atlanta right now, or Orlando. But I knew a Hare Krishna. His name was Dhananjaya Dasa, and he was doing some carpentry work. They were stripping the paint off the walls at Tittenhurst Park, John's estate in Ascot, and he moved a bureau in their bedroom, a wardrobe, because they don't really have closets in England. They hang it all up, and he found all these used hypodermic needles behind there. So they were, they'll tell you in interviews that they were sniffing it, but they were shooting it too. Yeah,
we've had A.J. Weberman on the show.
He's great.
Yeah. I've known it.
Weberman's great.
I've known him since I was 17 years old.
Yeah, ask him about the John and Yoko funding the IRA.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Surface-to-air missiles.
We talked about that. Okay.
To shoot down British planes.
Hey, what do you know about their connections with the Hells Angels going up to Dakota? Anything?
Nothing about that.
Okay,
they went to Apple.
Because May Pang had mentioned that.
May Pang's good.
Yeah.
May Pang's good. A lot you realize I'm persona non grata with a lot of these people because I'm, I tell truth to power. And that's always dangerous and unpopular with those in power.
Yeah, don't worry about that. No,
I'm not worried about it.
What do you know about Yoko being involved in witchcraft?
Absolutely 100% true. She used to go down to Colombia.
Okay.
Here's what I say about Yoko and the paranormal and astrology. If she was such a good damn astrologer, why did they go out to the record plant on December 8th, 1980? I mean, she couldn't see that coming? Well, she could have stayed home that day. So it's all garbage. She's a rank opportunist of the lowest order, talentless, covetous, greedy. I've got tapes of her talking terribly about Julian Lennon and how he doesn't deserve a penny. There's even questions about that will.
Right.
Because that will was made just not very long before He died.
Okay, Geoffrey.
He changed his will, and just shortly thereafter, he died.
We got a hard break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about that. We got Geoffrey Giuliano, GeoffreyGiuliano.net, but also, too, check out this, like I was saying before, this incredible stuff, this GiulianoCollection.com. This is all great stuff. 30 books these guys renting. Fascinating guy. We'll be right back after these messages with more of Geoffrey Giuliano. Thank you so much, Geoffrey, man. It's great stuff.
I bet you say that to all the girls.
Yeah, I do. And that is really great stuff, man. And we'll be right back after these messages. This is your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. And if you're enjoying the show right now, there's more. You can get more. You can go to the Ed Opperman YouTube channel, and you could subscribe there. And we have archives of all of our past shows for over the past 3 years, about 200, 300 shows. You can also go to the Opperman Report Spreaker channel, and you could follow us there. Again, a ton of shows, about 300 shows on there. And whenever we do an impromptu show, an emergency type broadcast that we do during the week occasionally, you'll get an email notifying you of breaking news and spontaneous broadcasts that we may do during the week. You can also go to OppermanReport.com and become a member. If you become a member, you help support the free archives on Spreaker and YouTube, and you help support the free shows on Friday evening and on Saturday evening. Each of these shows, Friday evening and Saturday evening, are carried for free on 7 internet stations, okay? So you help support that, but also, too, at OppermanReport.com in the members section, we have exclusive content. Shows that are recorded during the week that are only available to members. So please check out OppermanReport.com and help support the show.
The son of a Polish immigrant who grew up in a Brooklyn tenement, Bernie Sanders. He went to public schools, then college, where the work of his life began, fighting injustice and inequality, speaking truth to power. Bernie moved to Vermont, won election and praise as one of America's best mayors. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families and for principle, opposing the Iraq War, supporting veterans. Now he's taking on Wall Street and a corrupt political system that holds up a rigged economy. Bernie's campaign is funded by over 1 million small contributions from people like you. He's fighting for living wages, equal pay, and tuition-free public colleges. Bernie Sanders.
People are sick and tired of establishment politics, and they want real change.
Bernie Sanders. Husband, father, grandfather. An honest leader. Building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Check out strawmanmusic.com. Sean Duff is our webmaster here at the Opperman Report, and he's a very talented musician. He's part of a band called Strawman. They're based up there in Canada. Don't hold that against them. These are like-minded folks. If you like the shows you hear on the Opperman Report, you'll like the music that they have over at strawmanmusic.com.
Enough is enough. Wall Street's greed and illegal behavior drove this country into the worst economic downturn since the 1930s. And then, after getting a huge taxpayer bailout because they were too big to fail, it turns out that 3 out of the 4 largest banks are bigger today than they were before we bailed them out. That's crazy. I'm Bernie Sanders. My plan: break up the big banks who are strangling our economy and make them pay their fair share of taxes. Then we can invest in the middle class, expand Social Security, and provide universal college education. I'll rein in Wall Street behavior so they can't crash our economy again. Will they like me? No. Will they begin to play by the rules if I'm president? You better believe it. I'm Bernie Sanders, Democratic candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
You know, you can get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, if you go to my website, emailrevealer.com. Now, this is a limited edition book, okay? And you can get a signed copy of this book, and it'll be personally autographed to you or whoever you want to give the book to as a gift. Once you have my signature on that book, you can copy the signature and put it on checks and pass them all over the world. Emailrevealer.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator.
He's fought injustice and inequality his whole life. Bernie Sanders. As a college student, he was arrested for challenging segregated housing. Bernie marched with Dr. King and thousands of others for civil rights. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families on health care and jobs. Now he's taking on Wall Street banks and a corrupt political system that keeps in place a rigged economy. Bernie Sanders, a reformer who believes in ending racial profiling and mass incarceration so the justice system works for everyone. Bernie Sanders.
There is no president who will fight harder to end institutional racism and reform our broken criminal justice system.
Bernie Sanders, an honest leader building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. And we have with us today Geoffrey Giuliano from geoffreygiuliano.net and this other thing I keep telling you about.
How about the Geoffrey Giuliano channel on YouTube, where you can see my movies and interviews about my books and a lot of cool stuff. I think we have over 70 videos there now.
Oh, get out of here. Okay, I didn't even know about that.
I'm gone.
Cool stuff. Hey, but when we left, we were talking about Yoko and witchcraft. What else do you know? What do you got?
What do I got? She used to go down to Columbia, and she'd, Fred Seaman, who used to work for John, used to say, Yoko likes to get ripped off. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, some witch comes and said, we have to do this ceremony to protect you and to protect John or Sean. And she'd give hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to these charlatans, gladly. And it just is nonsense. And, I'm writing a book about her called Black Widow, which I'm not supposed to tell anyone about. And it's a trip, Hey, do you know that during World War II that they were bombed out, the Onos were bombed out of their luxury estate, and that Yoko, the oldest of the Ono children, all the children got separated from the parents, and she wandered around homeless and taking care, which I have great respect for, of her younger siblings, and they all had cyanide capsules, and they were
my God, you're kidding.
Prepared to take them if they were ever in dire straits or happened to run into the Americans. She might want to pull out that cyanide capsule after my book Black Widow is published.
Now, what about the story about how she was institutionalized? She was in a mental institution.
She was.
Now, how did she get out of there? Did she escape from there?
Okay. Tony Cox, her first husband that she had Kyoko with, came and took her out. Sweet talked the doctors and took her out. Listen, I don't blame her for being crazy. Creative people are different. There's no question about that. I live I'm living with my childhood friend. He's a doctor, and he says, you're an energy vampire. You suck all the energy out of the room. You have to be the center of attention. I understand what that is. When Robin Williams, just let me digress for a minute. Okay. When Robin Williams killed himself, I knew exactly why that was. Because performers and people in the arts sometimes become compulsive. I can rarely, I have to control myself. No matter where I am, if somebody throws me a straight line, and I know I can come back with some humorous, retort, I'll do it. And it's very difficult to live with. It's hard on marriages and relationships. And I understand that in show business, people, they think different, as Apple said in that thing. So, yeah, I don't blame her for that.
Okay.
What I blame her for, which is plenty, is ripping off John Lennon. And after he died, taking all his doodles from his various little scratch pads. He might have been just talking on the phone like you people do. And then they doodle something. She put them together. They were never intended for publication. She put them together from different sources, even worse. Let's say he drew a giraffe. She'd take that from one sketchbook, and then he might have drawn a monkey somewhere and put them together, and it's like John's Zoo. And then she would have a stamp or a chop on the corner, and she'd sell them for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Go to Google, folks, and look up John Lennon, Yoko Ono art fraud, and you can read all about it. Funny thing, artists can't create works of art after they're dead. It stops when they die. But it didn't stop with John Lennon. He's created all kinds of new artwork after he died, and it was done. Even Yoko hand colored them in and passes them
really?
on. So yeah, that's a big. You want a scandal? There's a scandal right there. There's hundreds of millions of dollars involved in that. But let me tell you the best Yoko Ono story.
Go ahead.
I was interviewing Norman Birch, who was the uncle of John Lennon through his mother's side. He was married to Harry Stanley, who was his mother Julia's sister. And I met him when he was in his early 80s, and he was in a little tiny, respectable cottage-type house in suburban Liverpool, quite near Penny Lane, and John's house on Mclibel Avenue with Auntie Mimi. And we talked, and suddenly started crying, weeping. And I said, Mr. Birch, what's the matter? Because he was talking about John used to spend a lot of time there and so forth. And he said, look at this. And he pulled out a lawyer's letter. And it was from David Warmflash, still probably in practice, in New York City. It said, Dear Mr. Birch, as you know, the house in which you have enjoyed, 45 years of residency is the property of John, was the property of John Lennon, and is now the property of the John Lennon estate. As you've enjoyed so many years here, rent-free, we now have to inform you that you have whatever it was, 90 days, 120. I used to have the letter. I've got it somewhere. I think I published it in one of my books. Get out, evict. So Yoko Ono was going to evict this 80-year-old John Lennon's uncle, Norman Birch. And I said to him, what's the house worth? He said, I think it's worth about maybe 50,000, 60,000 pounds. Ed, she spends more of that in an afternoon shopping for one of her fur coats. They have an apartment. She has an apartment in Dakota just for fur coats, Well, so she needs it. Wait a minute. She needs that extra money. So, I just wasn't going to put up with that. So I went to my friend Roger Hitz at Star Magazine, and I published it. And a funny thing happened after it hit the media. It was withdrawn, and he lived there until he died. So that was something nice I was able to do for one of John. John would have killed her. Tell you another cool story. I wrote a book with Julia Baird, John Lennon's sister, with an introduction by Paul McCartney called John Lennon, My Brother. It wasn't in the book, but she told me that she used to call up there, and she'd say, hello, is John there? And Yoko would answer the phone and say, oh, no, I'm so sorry, John's not here. And John would be listening on the other end, because remember the party line. He'd say, hey, don't you, and I can't do all the obscenities, but there was a long string of the C-U word, the F-U word. Don't you ever blah, 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 blah to my sister again. If my sister calls me, I'll come in there and I'll kick your ass. And he did a few times too. And she would try to block John. It's well known. She blocked him from the other Beatles. She blocked him from his own family. And she tried to evict John's 80-something-year-old uncle, and it was only me publishing the story in Star Magazine that allowed that man. And then tragically, kind of just after he was allowed to stay and they withdrew that, he was crossing the street, just like John's mother, on Mclibel Avenue, and was knocked down by a car, just like John's mother. I don't think Yoko was driving, folks. But she won in the end, because by virtue of his death, she got the house and got to buy another fur coat. She is a dirtbag.
You talk about her throwing away money, though, to these psychics, right?
Yeah.
What do you know about the man who took the picture of John with Mark David Chapman?
I know him very well.
Oh, I'd like to interview him. What do you know about the story? But I heard that she paid him.
No.
Yeah.
Forget. I'm going to give you something so much better than that.
Okay. But did Yoko give him like?
Just give me a moment.
Go ahead.
You're going to be happy.
Okay.
This is an interruption well worth your time.
Okay.
Someone sent me a photograph with no return address about 20 years ago, maybe. And I went out to my mailbox, and there it was, an envelope with no return address, and there was an 8x10 photograph. And what was in there? A picture of John Lennon laying on the floor of the Dakota, bleeding to death. I still have it. I don't know who sent it. I don't know why it was sent to me. I assume it was sent to me, but to publish. But who took it? Who took it? I've had it looked at by forensics people. It's real. It's not doctored. It's way before Photoshop. It's a picture seconds after John Lennon was shot. Remember, he was shot as he was coming in, getting out of the limo, shot in the back 5 times, and with explosive hollow point bullets. And then he stumbled into when you go into the Dakota, there's the sort of driveway, and then there's an office to the right, which is the entrance, and you have to go by security. Again, there's security at the front, and then there's it's an old lady behind the desk. But I recognized it to be true because I've been to the Dakota several times socially with Yoko Ono in the past, long past, and I recognized the tiles on the floor, and I have a photograph on my hard drive somewhere of John Lennon bleeding to death. But it's not that so much as who took it. Was it the cops? Was it someone who worked at the Dakota? But I don't know anything about it. It's a great mystery, and it's not a very pretty photograph, and not that I want it, not that I asked for it, and I have yet to publish it. But yeah, wasn't that worth an interruption? There's a mystery for you.
You don't think Gorsh took the picture, do you?
No, okay. He wasn't there. But the point is, there were no cell phones at that time that took pictures.
That's true.
So somebody pulled out a camera and went snap. You know.
Well, do you know the story? But did Gorsh receive $800,000 from Yoko?
No, but that sounds about right. For what? I told you she likes to be ripped off. For what?
For a good question. Supposedly, like, he ran into hard times, and she gave him $800,000, maybe for the rights to that picture he took of any.
Or maybe for her, or maybe if we're going to go into the realm of conjecture, for other photographs that he took that she didn't want anybody to see.
Right.
You know, because he was in front of the Dakota all the time. You know, John was a really nice guy. I met John when I was 14 at the Everson Museum of Art in Syracuse. And he took time to talk to me. It was totally normal. He signed a bunch of stuff for me, and he said, "Are you good? Are you okay? You got everything?" And I said, "Yeah, man, thanks a lot." Or whatever I said. I probably wasn't that cool. And it was on his 30th or 31st birthday. People can look it up, when he had a show called This Is Not Here with Yoko at the Everson Museum of Art in Syracuse, New York. But he was a lovely guy, and that's probably what got him killed. You know, and when I went to interview Yoko in 1983, we were in the Dakota, and, you know, you had to take your shoes off. There was all white carpet. That's fine. And we were, you know, doing the interview, and I had to go to the bathroom. And when I went outside of the room, there was a guy sitting in the hall, just like two feet away from the door that I just came out of, with some kind of incredible gun. I don't know anything about guns, but it was some kind of auto machine, take your head off, you know, cut you in half gun. And he was just casually sitting there in the hall, you know. This is after John died. Again, I don't particularly blame her for that, but it was a kind of a shock for me to see. I couldn't help opening the cabinet, the medicine cabinet, and there were all these sort of prescriptions for John Lennon, and no, I didn't take one. Next question, counselor.
What do you make of the whole Lennon assassination? Do you think it ends with Mark David Chapman, or do you think it might be a greater conspiracy?
No. I think it ends with Mark David Chapman. He was a whack jobber. Not everything is 9/11.
Okay.
I hate that. When people try to think that, you know, like that, what's that guy, Alex Jones? Right. Everything that happens is a conspiracy. Of course, look at his house. Go to Google and look up Alex Jones' house. You'll see why he's doing it. He's making a lot of money, millions of dollars.
Okay. What do you know about Mark David Chapman, the connection to Kenneth Anger? You know anything about that?
I know who Kenneth Anger is, and I know that there was a look. I understand that you're a private detective, but I've written 30 books on the Beatles, and I've known a lot of these people, and I've met all the Beatles and known them a little bit. Know Pete Townshend very well,
right.
Donovan very well, Richie Havens very well. Some of them I've known. I really don't think you can make hay out of a lot of this stuff. I think Mark David Chapman was really, unlike Lee Harvey Oswald, a whack job lone nut that wanted to, exactly as they say, get his name in the paper, and he's paying the price. Do you know that Gloria Abe, his wife, never divorced him? They're still married.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually have her phone number.
Yeah.
But yeah,
what does she have to say about it?
I haven't gotten around to asking her. Yeah. Okay, now
well, she never wrote a book, and she could have squeezed out a couple of million out of that. She never did.
Okay. What about the kidnapping of Yoko's former children, and then her ex-husband went into hiding?
Tony Cox, that's absolutely true.
Dude.
And they should have been kidnapped, because if I had a child with Yoko Ono, I wouldn't want it around that bitch either.
You don't have any
She makes Donald Trump look like Gandhi.
You don't have contact information for him, do you?
She's the Ayatollah of rock and roller. No, he doesn't talk to anybody unless you give him a whole bunch of money. He's not cheap like me, Ed.
Okay. Hey, what about, have you heard of this cult in New York City called the Process Church of the Final Judgment? Any...
No, but I can tell you that Jimi Hendrix was murdered.
Okay, we'll get to that.
No, we won't. We'll have to do another show. I'm not giving you all this stuff for free.
Okay.
You'll have to give me some more promotion. No, call me up another time, and we'll do the murder of Jimi Hendrix if you want.
Okay, so what about what did you want to share? I'll tell you what. One more thing with Yoko and all. Elliot Mintz.
Elliot Mintz. Let me tell you something. I got copies of John Lennon's diaries.
Okay.
That Elliot Mintz, that little weasel, has been dining out and has made millions of dollars for himself with his so-called publicity services or the client management that he does for Bob Dylan and all these
Paris Hilton
pop stars. Look, John despised Elliot Mintz. It's in the diaries. And he was Yoko's friend.
Right.
That was Yoko's friend, and he was forced upon John Lennon to be a kind of a spy, so that Yoko could know what was happening. When every minute of every day, Yoko had to keep tabs on her captive. Like ISIS, So Elliot Mintz was sent in there for recon to kind of like, all right, what's, and he would report back to Yoko. That guy's the biggest weasel on this God's green earth. When I wrote that book, Lennon in America, and Harry Nilsson, my old buddy, gave me copies of John's diaries, he said they weren't real. They were fake. And that was all they could say, because if they were real, then he's got a problem, because he knows and I know what John had to say about him in those diaries, and none of it was good. He couldn't stand Elliot Mintz.
Here's a guy who leaves his Laurel Canyon apartment the night John Lennon's assassinated, hops on a plane. And there's even some kind of fuzziness of he got on that plane before.
Talk to Jack Douglas. Yeah. Ask Jack Douglas, the producer of Double Fantasy and many other John Lennon records, an engineer. Ask him about these photos that were taken, which meant the world to Jack Douglas after John died, of them listening to Starting Over for the first time, and John was hugging him, and it was just there was a great photographer there. Could have been Bob Gruen, I don't know. Color photographs, and there were 6 of them. And Jack Douglas told me the story that he had a break-in many years later, like a decade or more later, in his house. And his house is filled. It's a beauty. He's a millionaire. There's Tiffany lamps, there's this, there's that, everything to steal. The only thing that was stolen were those 6 photos. And previous to that, I don't know the time period, it was maybe a few months, there was an occasion in which, the way I heard it, the way I felt it. I have to be careful what I say. From Jack Douglas, the producer of Double Fantasy, was that somehow Elliot Mintz had invited himself over. And when he went into Jack Douglas's study with Jack, he saw the pictures, and got a very unhappy look in his face and commented on those pictures. And then Jack told him the story. Not long after, there was a break-in at his house, and the only thing stolen were those pictures. Circumstantial evidence, but, very damning.
Yeah, the guys had some ride. Now, what do you... I tell you what, we have about a half hour left, okay? How about Brian Jones?
Let's talk about Brian Jones.
Okay.
Brian Lewis Hopkins Jones was the son of a aeronautical engineer called Lewis Jones with a big stick up his ass. That's not cursing. I think I can say that.
Yeah.
Very conservative guy. He was an aeronautical engineer, so he was no dummy. And Brian's mother, Louisa, was a piano teacher. Unlike any of the Rolling Stones, Brian Jones had a proper musical education, both at home and outside of the home, keyboards and wind instruments and so forth. He was the captain of his swimming team. He was an expert athletic swimmer. I have pictures of him doing one-hand stands off the diving board. So don't think for a minute that tiny little pool, which I've been to in the back of Cotchford Farm, could be the source of any accidental drowning. Don't say he got too high and loaded and went to sleep in the pool. Don't say that, because I have the autopsy reports, which weren't easy to get. In fact, they were sealed for 50 years on under national security. Why? Why? He was just a dumb 27-year-old rock star, Brian Jones. What's he got to do with national security? I'll tell you in a minute. But Richard Branson got them for me because Virgin published my book, and they landed on my desk one day, and there they were. And I was amazed to see that there were no drugs in Brian Jones' system when he died. There was some alcohol, a tiny bit of alcohol, which had been metabolized already in his urine and therefore was not affecting him at the time of his death. He was as straight and sober as a judge in a tiny little swimming pool. I know you've heard of Dr. Cyril Wecht, the world-famous forensic pathologist who I worked with on my book, Painted Black, The Life and Death of Brian Jones, which will be coming out. You can go to brianjonesbook.com. You can't buy it because I'm not done with it yet. I've only been working on it for 25 years. But Dr. Wecht said to me, look, even if he had a fatal heart attack, which would prove to be a fatal heart attack, and he was anywhere in that pool, let's say the very middle of that pool would be the farthest point from any edge. He said it was only 5 feet. Even if he said he had a heart attack, you could make your way to the edge to hold on for 5 feet. Brian Jones was homicidally drowned in that pool by Tom Keelock. Not Frank Thorogood, as Terry Rawlings in his dumb book will tell you, but by Tom Keelock. Now, I knew who the real murderer of Brian Jones was since early 90s, but he was still alive, and I couldn't say it. Well, he's died now. He died 40 years to the day that Brian Jones died, at almost the same hour. And
who is Tom Keelock? Who is he?
Tom Keelock was a driver for the Rolling Stones. Just watch the movie Stoned. Everybody can watch the movie. You can download it for a nickel now, or probably download it on piratebay.org for free. Came out in 2006, directed by Stephen Woolley, and you'll get 20% of the story. The rest of and then you'll know who Tom Keelock is. Okay. The rest of the story you're going to get in a documentary 4-hour film that I've been working on. I'm going back to Thailand to do some more editing on it. I've done some more interviews I've been working on for several years. Yeah, I'm a guy that, it's like, because I made $9 million and I did the whole money thing, I'm very interested in achievement. A lot of people live. I like to achieve while I'm living. And so I'm willing to spend 25 years I'm investigating the death of Brian Jones. I spent 8 years writing a vegetarian cookbook. I think when I die, there'll be some quality work. And especially as a biographer, a biographer at some point, if you do it long enough, you become a historian. And I think that I think the Rolling Stones will be important and the Beatles will be important. You notice there's a little hesitation in my voice there. I'm not sure they'll be Beethovens and Picassos. They may be, but they may fade gradually, generationally. We don't know. We won't be here. But they're still important now, and I felt a responsibility to try to chronicle them as best I could. Now, after I did all the Beatle books I could do, and there wasn't a whole lot to say, with Lennon in America being my, well, no, I guess carry that weight, my Beatle biography being my last and most important Beatle book. I decided to work on the Stones. And Brian Jones, that was funny the way that came about. I remember I was leaning against the window of my big Victorian estate, and there was a little bit of snow coming down. And my wife Brenda at the time said to me, "What are we going to do for the next book?" And I was kind of had my nose against the window, and, you know, my breath was going on the glass. I remember every detail. And I said, "Brenda, what if Brian Jones didn't drown in that swimming pool? What if he was murdered?" I got to tell you, man, that when I signed the contract for that book and it was announced I was writing a book on Brian Jones, my wife we had a big house in the country. You know, all poor boys buy a big house when they get money. And she said, "Geoffrey, come here." And I looked, and there was some guy in camouflage gear looking at us with camouflage-covered binoculars into it wasn't our bedroom window, it was one of the downstairs bedrooms, and I saw that guy, and he ran away when I saw him. And we had our phones tapped. We were followed by, who was that private investigator that went to prison, the real famous one?
Pelicano.
Yes.
I
found Pelicano in front of my house many times, personally. And I told him to F off. And he tried to intimidate me. He tried to bribe me. Don't write this book on Brian Jones. Don't get involved with writing things about Yoko Ono, because these things were going on simultaneously. Dude, I was offered several $1 million by a party I cannot name, by an attorney who represented someone whom I cannot name, to not write some things that I may have written or may be writing, and I turned it down.
Okay, well, what was the motivation for murdering Brian Jones?
Tom Keelock was an uneducated yob. He's like an East Ender. He talked like this, you know what I mean? And he had like a taxi driver service, and he was like, got a gig to drive the Stones around, but before too long he became like the tour manager, you know what I mean? And he was one of those kind of guys, and uneducated, and he was trying to move up in the ranks. And Brian Jones started the Stones. He owned the name Rolling Stones by virtue of the fact that he put an ad in the Jazz News in 1961 advertising for musicians to join his band, the Rolling Stones. And so there could have been a case made, there certainly would be now with that brand, that Brian Jones owned the name Rolling Stone. Was that why he was murdered? I don't think so. Because in those days they were all hippies and they were kids and they didn't think like that. Was Alan Klein, the notorious manager of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, involved? I don't think so. What I think was this. Tom Keelock, who was the driver, wanted to ingratiate himself to his masters. About 2 weeks before Brian died, Keith, Mick, and Charlie Watts went down to Cotchford Farm in Hartfield, Sussex, to Brian's house to kick him out of the band. To kick him out of his band! I know what I would have said if someone had come to my house and tried to kick me out of my band. I would have said, no, I'm kicking you out of my band. You're not kicking me out of my band. But Brian was like, okay, man, whatever. He was sick of it anyway. He didn't like that pop music they were doing. So anyway, it is my belief, Tom, who was around at that time, and I've got absolute unequivocal eyewitness proof that can put him at the scene of the murder. I believe that in an attempt, after he saw that Brian was dismissed from the Rolling Stones, but was still being seen as being, quote unquote, difficult, that he murdered him to ingratiate himself to his masters, the Rolling Stones, thinking that he would go up higher in the Stones hierarchy, which was very profitable in the management end. And I'll tell you that he was finally dismissed not long after Brian died by going into a record company trying to sell some stolen tapes of Brian Jones to be released after his death. He was in possession of stolen property. Also, I have photographs coming out in my book of Tom Keelock burning. Now, you're a private detective. What would happen if I was murdered and someone who worked for me started a bonfire of all my belongings out in front of the house, while my body was still in the house? I believe he'd be arrested for destruction of evidence. You would know better than me, destroying a crime scene. Yeah, I got pictures of him burning Brian's stuff. So Brian's, maybe the ambulance, I think, had just taken off with his body down to the morgue. And he went in the house and collected all of Brian's stuff. It shows it in the movie Stone, and throws gasoline on it and starts burning it. Why? Some have suggested that, and a lot of it was clothes. Some of it's been suggested that Brian's clothes were wet and he was thrown in and held under the water fully clothed. Also, Tom Keelock, it's hard to go over all this evidence with you, but he was also in the service. I couldn't tell, was it the Air Force or Marines? One of the two. And that he was in the special unit. And one of the things that they learned was a technique of how to drown men quickly by pulling them backwards underwater, and it instantly fills up their lungs with air. And that's what Brian died of. Not drugs, immersion of fresh water in the lungs. In other words, he traditionally drowned. And Dr. Cyril Weck said to me, Geoffrey, homicidal drowning is one of the most clever ways of killing anyway. I said, yeah, but people would fight back and there'd be defensive wounds. He said, not if there was 4 people or more. One on one leg, one on the other leg, one on one arm, one on the other arm, and one holding the head under, or maybe one in the middle, pushing the middle of the body down. You'd have to hold him down. How long, Dr. Weck? About 6 minutes to make sure he's dead. And there'd be no defensive wounds, which there were not on the body. There were no defense. That's why a lot of people thought that, he just got loaded and fell in the pool. Because, hey, if you tried to hold me under the water, obviously there's no way to prevent defensive wounds on the body, but there were none. But as Dr. Weck suggested to me, it could be very easily done if it was a coordinated professional hit. And he called it diabolically clever. We don't know that this happened, but it would be a way that you could drown someone and there'd be 0 wounds on the body. You just get enough guys to hold him down and he can't move.
And you say you have an eyewitness?
Several, but that has to come out in the book. You can't get that for free. But I would encourage anyone who wants to buy any high-ticket, absolutely authentic Beatles memorabilia, like Andy Warhol portraits of John Lennon for the Imagine cover, John Lennon sex tapes, John Lennon tripping on LSD, original tapes in the 60s that no one's heard, to go to Giuliano.com. I think I have the right to make a plug after giving you an hour and 40 minutes of my time, Mr. Opperman.
Can't be an hour and 40 minutes. I got 97 minutes. You're looking at Skype, right?
Looking at Skype, 1 hour, 40 minutes.
Yeah, it says on Skype, and I just noticed that too. I think that's because of, what the hell is that?
Maybe we've been talking an hour and 40 minutes.
You know what? You're right, because it says 11 minutes, 11 o'clock, and now it's 12.
Do me a favor and have your producers send me a link so I can hear this thing.
No, I will, yeah.
When's it going to come out?
I don't know, because I got to on a Friday night, probably next Friday night.
Okay, well, let me know. We should probably wrap it up, and please do call me. You're going to edit. You can call me. We can talk about lots of things. We can talk about the murder of Jimi Hendrix. We can talk about 9/11. We can talk about any more about the Beatles. We can talk about George Harrison. I knew him well. Just call me anytime you need Well, I don't know. Was I an interesting guest?
No, Geoffrey, we're not editing this. We're going to put this on. But the thing is, I definitely want to have you back for sure in the future. Okay, and if you have something that comes up that you want to promote, get a hold of me right away. We'll put you right back on the air right away.
Why don't we do a little kind of wrap up and ending and thanking me for how wonderful it all was, and then we'll say I'll bid you adieu and we'll wrap it up. You want to do that?
Yeah, but we're live. Okay, so,
we're not live.
They're going to hear this. Okay, but
no, they're not. You're going to edit it.
Geoffrey Giuliano, tell us where can people find you next, and where can people buy your books and stuff like that?
I don't want anybody to find me. But you can buy my
Pelicano
book.
Could find you.
But you can. I know you could, Ed. But the books, you see, if you buy them on Amazon, I don't make any money because those are the original crappy paper books that were put out in the 80s, 90s, and early, up to 2006. But if you could be a little bit patient, folks, you will get updated, beautiful versions that I spent way too many years on, now well over a decade, taking the original books, digitizing them, rewriting them, as I said, cleaning up the photos, finding new ones, documents, all that. They'll all be out on iBooks, but I think it's still a good year to 2 years away because it's really just a kind of one-man operation. Sometimes I have people that work with me, and it's a very laborious task because I wrote so many books. This is an abnormal amount. I've seen people say, yes, I've written 3 books. I've written over 30. So, I see that as kind of like, I question my sanity. That's just way, way on the overachiever scale. But I'm happy that I did it. But it took 20 years to write them. Now I've got 10 years so far in digitizing them and probably another couple of 2 to finish them up. So that's 32 years of my life on these books already. They should be up and forget about it already, and let them be other people's problem. I've suffered for these books. Now it's your turn, folks.
I have a feeling that when you do finally get these all digitized and back up on Amazon, then you get to keep 100%, right?
There's some Amazon takes something, but
yeah, right, yeah, okay, yeah, but the publishers get nothing at that point, right?
No, I am the publisher. IconEditions.press.
Okay, yeah, then there you go. I think you're gonna make a fortune again. I think about $10 million this time.
We'll see about that.
Yeah.
If I do, I'll just spend it on my 8-year-old son, Eden Garrett Giuliano, who is the only thing I really care about in my life.
And you have sole custody of this kid? You're raising him by yourself?
Full custody. What? Just can't resist being a cop. Yeah, dude, I'm raising him by myself, and his mother's Thai, and she's very happy that he's. Not too many Thai kids get the opportunity to go and be educated in the United States of America. I'll tell you what, if he matriculates all through university, he could probably go back and be prime minister. It's somebody that's done all their education in America and then returns to Thailand. They're like, whoa, gold plated. Or not. I don't know what. He can do what he wants to do. I'm not one of those fathers that tries to push my kids. But I love my son. One of my daughter, India, she's in her 20s. She said, if it weren't for Eden, you'd be a lonely old man. And I said, that's right. I would be. What a blessing to be 62 and have an 8-year-old son. In The Last Temptation of Christ by Martin Scorsese, there's Jesus. Not that I compare myself to Jesus, but Jesus was there, and he had a little, and when he was tortured and having, not sure and uncertain and then didn't know, and these things were perhaps improbable. He had a little angel, Martin Scorsese, beautiful little angel that followed him when he was in his most darkest moments. And for me, that's Eden Garrett Giuliano, my son. I can't tell you, like Ebenezer Scrooge with Tiny Tim, my reclamation, my chance at salvation, not in a religious sense, is to have this beautiful little boy as my son. And I'm just, the sun shines out of his ass, as someone once said. Not very poetic, but I really do just love my son.
No, I totally understand.
I'm a terrible guy that wrote terrible things about the Beatles, but I'm not so hard-hearted that I don't love my son Eden.
I totally understand. I think being a parent and a father to my little daughter is the greatest accomplishment in my whole life.
I didn't appreciate it when I was young.
I totally understand. Hey, but I wanted to ask you a couple of questions because, and we got about 15 minutes to fill. If you could give me a couple more minutes, is Pelicano. Now, a couple of questions is, how did you know that was Pelicano?
Because he came to my door and said, "Hey, I'm Anthony Pellicano. You better quit all this stuff with Yoko Ono or you're going to find yourself." And, he threatened me.
Okay. Where was it?
He threatened me, hung around my house, drove by me in a convertible when I was taking my kids to school and threw a summons in my door, in the open window of the car. I threw it right back and it landed in the back seat of his convertible. Yoko was trying to pull me into court to be a witness against Fred Seaman, and I didn't want to get involved. And I just dodged them. They'd bring him to the door, which is, they bring him to the door, you're served, right? They'd bring him to the door, and I'd just throw him back at the thing and leave him in the front yard to blow away. And they tried and tried and tried.
Now, where was this, in New York or California?
Yeah, Lockport, New York.
New York.
They'd nail him on the door. They didn't nail and mail. They taped him on the door. I'd hear them, and then I'd pull out the tape and I'd throw it at the woman.
And who is Fred Seaman?
Who's Fred Seaman?
Yeah.
Ooh, doggy, you don't know too much about the Beatles, do you?
No.
Fred Seaman was John Lennon's personal assistant.
Okay.
Norman Seaman was Yoko's friend before she knew John, and he was an art promoter, and he had a nephew called Frederick Seaman, and he's a very interesting character that's been cast as a villain. He wasn't really. He just told the truth. He told truth to power, and those people get into trouble in life. You know that. And he wrote a book called The Last Days of John Lennon, which is a really good book. And so is the Albert Goldman book, too. Oh, I'm sorry. The Last Days of John Lennon was the Albert Goldman book. I forgot what Fred Seaman's was called. But he was John Lennon's personal assistant in the last years of his life, and he spent more time with John Lennon than Yoko Ono did in those last 3 or 4 years of his life. And he went to Bermuda with John when he was writing the Double Fantasy on the Megan Jane, the sailboat that John sailed from wherever, where rich people sail boats out of New York City, Long Island, I guess, and then to Bermuda, with John at the helm much of the time, singing sea shanties during typhoons. It's a very interesting story about the last years. I'd urge you to pick up Fred Seaman's book.
So you can still get that book?
Yoko had him arrested,
right,
and beaten up. And you can Google him, and he was convicted of stealing from John Lennon and blah, blah, blah. It's just more Yoko Ono crap.
Okay, I am familiar with that book. Now, the question is, though, is that book is still available?
Every book is still available, I think. You can buy old copies on Amazon. And what I found was there was a lot of great Beatle books that were just like disappearing. And that's why I spent a decade, which I don't want to do, going over these same damn books that I wrote in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. But I just didn't, I didn't want it to be that I would die and the books wouldn't be there, and also Eden can make some money from them as well.
And one more question about Fred Seaman. Is he available for interviews, or they have
No. He's completely dropped out of, I'll tell you a story about Fred Seaman that's very exclusive.
Okay.
When he was convicted of stealing from Yoko Ono and the John Lennon estate and documents and lyrics and so forth, he was made to give up everything back to Yoko, photographs, negatives, song lyrics, millions of dollars worth of stuff that he purloined or maybe was given by John Lennon. We don't know. But he was convicted and pled guilty. The condition of his not going to prison was sentencing, was that he gave everything back to Yoko and turned everything in. Well, I stayed at his apartment. I was going to write a coffee table book with him on his photographs of John Lennon, which later he turned back over to Yoko Ono as her copyright because apparently, which was unbeknownst to me at the time, he'd signed, those things that when you work for celebrities, you can take pictures, but they belong to us, one of those confidentiality things. And anyway, I was at his house, and he went to somewhere. I think he went out with May Pang somewhere, and my son and I, who was a teenager, my son was snooping around under the desk, and he opened this, those cardboard things that you buy at the office supply store that hold documents, the big ones.
Yeah.
And there was a couple of them under the desk. And I said, "Get out of there. What are you doing? Don't be snooping around that." Oh, my God. He opened that thing up, There was original lyrics for All You Need Is Love, I Am the Walrus, letters, confidential, money, millions of dollars of documents which could have been sold at Sotheby's. My son Devin said to me, Dad, he was to have turned all this in. And if he does, if he's found to have any of this stolen Lennon stuff in his possession, he gets whatever the sentence was, 5 years or whatever it was. Let's take these boxes and get the hell out of here. I said, Devin, listen to me. I'm a well-known, and I think I just done the Joan Rivers show, which is on the
I saw that, yeah.
Giuliano channel. I think I just done the Joan Rivers show, David Letterman. I was a celebrity. I was a well-known guy. I was making a lot of money. He said, what's he going to do, Dad? What's he going to call the police and say that the stuff that I stole has been stolen? Come on, let's take it. There's a lot of money here. And you're a collector. And I said, I'm not going to. No, I'm not going to do that. No, I will not do that. We don't know the circumstances under which he got these. Maybe they were a very personal gift from John Lennon. Maybe he stole them. But I'm a celebrity at that point, and I have a career to protect, and I can't get involved in scandal. And no, I'm not going to steal anything. Don't be ridiculous. And we didn't. However, I spoke to a Beatle dealer recently called Gary Zimmett, well known. He runs something called Moments in Time. And I said to him, we were having lunch in LA, and I said, what if I'd taken those 2 boxes? He said, you'd be a multimillionaire. Yoko might have bought them back for a few million. Yeah. But at any rate, however you got rid of them, I could have gotten rid of them for you. You'd be a multimillionaire. You wouldn't have a thing to worry about today, and no one would have called the police. Aren't you sorry you didn't do it? And I said, no, I'm not. Well, maybe just a little. But let's put it this way. Fred Seaman had committed, well, what do you do if the judge says to you, did you turn everything back in? You've turned it and you say yes. What is that, perjury?
I suppose. Let me ask you a question. Now, this was, you're saying they were trying to serve you to testify in this case against Seaman.
This was later on down the road in a case about copyright case about some photographs, because I was doing a photo book of his photos of John Lennon, which were amazing.
Okay, gotcha.
All at, home photos behind the scenes. I'll tell you what, if you want to see some really rare John Lennon video shot by Fred Seaman, folks, go to YouTube and type in John Lennon 1980 Cold Springs Harbor, and somebody put a very exclusive stolen tape on YouTube, and it's still there. If you want to really see the inside world of John Lennon just before he died, sitting in a mansion with an unfurnished mansion with Sean alone while Yoko was off doing whatever she was doing. It's not very pretty in many ways. It's still there. You can take a look at that. It's well worth looking at. And that's one of the I know because I had the original VHS of that. I think I still have it.
I actually think I've seen it.
Yes, I have copies of John Lennon's diaries, which you never asked me about, and we're running out of time. We might have to do another show.
No, we're definitely going to do another show if you'll come back. Now, but my question about this litigation was, who was Yoko's lawyer in that litigation that they hired Pelicano?
David Warmflash. Hold on a minute. I got it right here on my Hotmail. Yoko Ono. I'll tell you exactly who it was. Yoko Ono case. Here we go.
Okay.
Paul Lacalzi. Paul, Li, capital Calsi was one of the attorneys. David Warmflash was another. Why? What are you going to try to do some more research on it, counselor?
No, I just want to see if I would recognize the name of which lawyer on the East Coast would hire Pelicano to bring Pelicano into this. Because,
well, it wasn't long after Pelicano threatened my life, dude.
I know he did.
That guy is a dirtbag. Is he still in the pokey or is he out?
Oh, no, he's still in there. We're safe for now.
You're kidding me. How long's he been in there?
He's got some time to do. They caught him with all kinds of C4 explosives, all kind of wiretaps. He's trying to sell those wiretaps he has, by the way. He has thousands of hours of telephone conversations encrypted. And from prison right now, he's trying to sell them from prison.
With who?
The guy's worked for everybody, man. The guy's worked. He was on David Chase with The Sopranos, with John Travolta, Michael Jackson. This guy's worked every freaking case.
Well, I will tell you that Anthony Pellicano threatened my life, my wife's life, was loitering in front of my home on many occasions, may have been the person we saw dressed in camouflage gear.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, he could have had a gun. I don't know what the hell that was. I didn't. I said, yeah. She said, there's a guy in camouflage gear with binoculars looking in the window. I said, don't be ridiculous. And I went out and, oh, my God, there he was. And off he took. He was a heavy-set man like Pellicano. Certainly could have been. But what a dirtbag. What an interesting guy, though. I should write a book with that guy.
You know what? You absolutely should, because there's very little. If you want to interview somebody about Pellicano, there's no one's willing to talk. First of all, and the only one is Mark Ebner, who came on my show a few times and had a lot of dealings with Pellicano. He's willing to talk about Pellicano, but otherwise, even the guy who wrote the only book about Pellicano doesn't want to talk about it. So still has a lot of reach, and interesting that he would wind up in this case.
No, he was. Absolutely. I mean, under the penalty of perjury.
No, I understand. I'm just saying, interesting he would wind up in this, and you wonder how this guy from California would wind up.
I believe that he came via Elliot Mintz.
I was going to say that. I didn't want to say it though. That would be my suspicion. Right off. That would have to be my suspicion.
Yeah. you want me to get into trouble?
No.
At this point, if Elliot Mintz or anybody else wants to sue me, I'll go back to what my father used to say: sue a dog, get a flea; sue a mouse, get a louse. There ain't nothing there. But in England, in Great Britain, they do an asset search before they sue you.
Yeah, they do it here too.
To make sure it's worth it.
Yeah,
it ain't worth it with me, man.
They do it here too. Okay, listen, we've covered a lot of ground, and I definitely want to have you back, but we've got about 3 minutes left. What do you want to leave us with for this show? How can people get a hold of you? A couple of big websites.
Okay, yeah. If you want to email me to buy any Beatles memorabilia, I'm selling my collection. Viking did 2 coffee table books. 2 coffee table books on my collection. It's the greatest Beatles collection in the world. Very, very expensive, but I'm a reasonable man. You can contact me at milesfarr@hotmail.com for acting opportunities, publishing opportunities, speaking engagements. milesfarr@hotmail.com. My Skype is G2 Media Arts. The 2 is the number 2, all lowercase, G2 Media Arts. You can find me on Facebook. You can. I urge you to subscribe to the Geoffrey Giuliano channel, where we. I'm Geoffrey. I just say a lot of things that maybe other people shouldn't or wouldn't say, and I think you'll find that interesting. And I would like to leave you with just that. That I'm easy to. I'm in line a lot, and Facebook, Geoffrey Giuliano. And would love to talk to the people that are interested to talk to me. And if you say anything that I find offensive, I just block you immediately.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
I'll never block you, Ed.
I know you won't. I trust me, I love you, man.
And
okay?
If I ever need a private investigator, I'll call you, too.
I'm the man. And also, too, anything that comes up you want to promote, get a hold of me right away. We'll put you right on.
I hope you'll do some gentle editing with this piece.
I don't think we need to. I think it's great.
Oh, come on. I was telling you what they're doing. They're doing the commercial.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Jeffrey, don't make me look like a schmo. All right. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. I do fool around rather too much. I'm not quite as serious or sober as a 62-year-old man should be. How old are you, Ed?
53.
Okay, young buck.
We got a lot in common. My friend.
Hey, I'll tell you some good news for people.
Okay.
If you take care of yourself, don't eat sugar, don't eat carbohydrates, exercise, don't lose weight. I don't care if you smoke methamphetamine, lose that weight. You can have a real good time in your 60s, and it could be cool. I don't feel any different, but in my 30s and my 60s, except that lying mirror in the bathroom that tells me that I'm an old man. Other than that, I feel exactly the same. So don't be paranoid about getting old. Just be paranoid about dying.
I agree, and lose the weight. Thank you, Geoffrey Giuliano.
All right, God bless you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Okay, they had Geoffrey Giuliano. A lot of great stuff, guys. Okay, and we definitely will have him back, and I have a plan for the next interview, so don't worry. Okay, guys, OppermanReport.com join a member section. We really can use the support right now because, like I said, we had that big trip with Hank Harris and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of expenses. So, and, things are fine now, but a month from now is what I'm worried about. So if you can become a member for the $6, that's a big help. Coming up, you know what? I don't know what's coming up because I don't know when I want to play this show. But some interesting stuff came out of this today. And I think I'm going to be in touch with this guy off the air about some questions I have for him. Guys, thank you so much. Good night. I'll see you next week. And if it's Friday night at 7:59 p.m., reboot. Okay, guys? I love you.